It is time to check in with our CJAD 800 legal contributor, Chris Dimakos. And Chris, we're going to begin today with a clip from Seinfeld and explain why we're playing this that ties into what you're going to be talking about today. Marco?
But at this point, I think it's best if we both go our separate ways.
I don't understand.
We don't like you. We want you to leave.
Clearer?
Yeah, clearer indeed. But you know what? Apparently, here's a case of art mirroring life, or maybe vice versa, because that's, in fact, Chris, what you're going to talk about today, this idea that rather than, an employer simply saying to you, okay, here's your severance, off you go, this other thing is called working notice in lieu of severance. So explain how this works.
Right. So what severance is intended for is basically to give you some transition money to be able to find another job and be able to not have, be stuck with a mortgage payment and rent and groceries without any money whatsoever. So companies, if they let you go without any good or just cause, well, then they have to give you what is called severance, and it's supposed to have, take care of you until you find another job. And the longer you work somewhere, the older you are, the more difficult the job conditions are, well, the more severance you would get. Well, there is this alternative, and companies are starting to use it more and more, where they say, we're letting you know now that in a year from now or in a year and a half from now, you're going to stop working for us. So you still have to come into work every single day. You're going to get paid, but know now today that this is working notice that your job is going to come to an end. And the good thing about that for companies is they get to save paying you out the full amount of severance with you leaving, so they get an employee there. The bad thing is they don't really like to have employees hanging around that know they have no future at the company. It's usually not a good formula. So what happens usually is during that working notice, there's conflict, and either the employee decides to quit or the employer says, I've had enough, and lets them go, and then a legal debate happens after that. But, the point I'm trying to make is working notice is supposed to let the company keep you on board for the full amount of time that they've given you notice for, and it forces you to go to work every day, and that's in exchange for having to pay you severance. Mm-hmm. It doesn't often work out, and that episode of Seinfeld was an example of that.
So the subtext here, right, is clearly that the employer, realizing they can get away with this, hopes that you're going to be so dissatisfied at work or realize at some point, you know what, why am I still here? Because even though I'm still able to collect a salary, it's pretty obvious they don't want me here, they don't like me here, et cetera, and they actually hope that you will leave beforehand. Is that what's really happening here?
That's what often happens. And in this case, a case out in BC that the Superior Court looked at, they looked at an employer who said, hey, this employee is not leaving. So they changed their office from being in front of everyone to a storage locker.
Wow.
They started to relieve the employee of their responsibilities, and they kept on making it harder and harder for the employee until the employee said, you know what, I can't take this anymore. I'm resigning, but it's because you pushed me out. I'm still entitled to that severance, and I'm still entitled to more because of, it wasn't sufficient when you gave it to me. So the court looked at that and said, listen, if you're going to give working notice, you can't start changing the circumstances of work. You got to let them play. You got to let that play out. Let them have the same responsibilities, and you can't put them in a storage locker and expect them to keep coming to work. So again, working notice is a tool that an employer can use, but often regrets doing so within 2 or 3 months of it playing out, because it's very hard to have an employee who has no future at the company still have access to all the sensitive information and be in company meetings and take part in the decision-making process of how this company is going to act.
In the case you just referenced, so I'm taking it for granted then that the judge or the court ruled with the employee in that case.
They did. They said for two reasons. They said if you're going to use a working notice, that's perfectly legal, but you have to do so in good faith, and you have to do so, allowing the employee to continue to execute their job functions. If you don't want to have them execute any of their job functions, well, then you should be letting them go, and you should give them the severance instead of doing what you guys did.
Okay, but wait. So now let's say you get to this point. I'm going to make an assumption here, so tell me if I'm wrong. If we assume the employer has done this in bad faith, right, rather than having to pay severance, the idea is here you want to minimize the amount of money you would have to pay. That's clearly the number one idea for the employer?
Yeah, the number one idea for the employer is because they look at the numbers, and if you have to pay someone a year and a half of salary up front, and not spaced out over the course of a year and a half, that's a big chunk of cash flow that's going to be taken out of the company. So they probably want to keep their cash flow and they probably want to space the payment of this employee out, and they probably say, you know what, you never know. Maybe the employee is going to say on their own, I don't want to do this anymore. I found something else. I found another job. I'm going to jump ship. I don't like it here. It's not pleasant here. And they kind of hope that's going to happen, where the employee is going to say, I found something else. I'm leaving early. Is that okay with you? Great. And you can leave. So it's to save money for one, and two, protect your cash flow, because, paying someone out requires to pay that full amount of money, if they indeed paid in a lump sum. So again, the company's looking out for their interests when they want to issue the working notice versus a severance lump sum payment.
By the way, this idea of I found another job while you're in the midst of this, agreement, this, the working agreement, the working notice, you can do that, and then you forfeit whatever other money would have been coming to you as soon as you take that new job?
Exactly. That's exactly what happens, because, the working notice is supposed to transition you from your current employment to your new prospective employment. And if you find new employment, well, then it's supposed to cover that. Sometimes what we have is the new employment pays less, and then some math has to get done and some negotiations have to get done to top up whatever amount of money you're losing out on because of this new job. And, negotiations take place at that point. But you're absolutely right. Once you start making money at the new job, well, then that automatically entitles the employer to say, hey, look, we gave them sufficient time. They found another job. We don't have to keep paying them. You're not going to pay them in double for working at the same job. So there's a lot of advantages at the outset for an employer to do that. The problem is, in practice, when it starts playing out, they don't foresee exactly how difficult it is to have the employee there every single day in those meetings, knowing that they're not going to be part of the formula in the future. And that's when trouble happens, and it usually ends up in court.
All right, so here's today's free legal advice from Chris Dimakos. Chris, someone listening now, finding themselves in this position, they've been giving working notice instead of severance. What's the next move?
Yeah, so when you get a working notice that someone's saying, we're letting you go, you keep coming to work, the first thing you want to do is you want to evaluate how much notice they gave you and whether or not it's sufficient. That's even before you jump on board. The second thing you want to do, if it is sufficient, you want to make sure that you understand what your obligations are going to be during that time. You don't want to have a situation where the employer says, you have to come to work every day, but we're going to stick you in this office and you're going to basically doing nothing all day. That's not what the law says has to happen. You have to continue your job,
okay,
at least to some degree, like you were doing before. You might have to train a new employee, you might have to do certain things, but you can't just be put into a storage locker like the episode and asked to stick it out there for a year doing nothing. So the first thing, is it sufficient? Is there enough time there? And the second thing you want to do is figure out what exactly you're going to be doing during that time and making sure it's legal. And often, you know what happens? A negotiation starts taking place. You can say, you know what? Can we work something out? I'll look for a job. If I find something else, can we have some sort of arrangement where we negotiate what a severance would look like if I find another job? All these things are negotiable. Nothing's written in stone. So when you get something like that, the first thing you want to do is have it reviewed. Take a look at what they're saying. Is it sufficient? Does it check off all the boxes? And then you can start negotiating if you have to.
Chris Dimakos, our CJAD 800 legal contributor. Chris, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.
Canadian women are looking for more out of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.